Hello, my name is Sam Owen. I'm a current Smarks Urbanism candidate at MIT. Today I'll be presenting my ongoing research entitled The West After Water: Extractions, Frictions, and Power in the Desert Southwest. This study provides a critical inquiry into the infrastructures of extraction, transmission, and accumulation that enable American-style urbanism to develop in arid regions. Focusing on the exploitation of water in the Colorado River system, the study begins with an assessment of the region's dominant development framework, followed by an exercise to analyze and model the visible and invisible consequences of this extraction, and finally, speculates on alternative development frameworks, investigating the issue of mass water extraction through the lens of the water itself, a submerged perspective. First, I will introduce the Colorado River Basin. The Colorado is the fifth longest river in the United States. It is the dominant river of the southwestern region, carrying snowmelt from the Rocky Mountains across arid deserts before draining into the Sea of Cortez. The Colorado River drains 8% of the land area of the continental U.S., including the territory of 7 U.S. states as well as 2 Mexican states. This river has also undergone drastic transformation through massive infrastructural projects. Across this watershed, 22 major dams and over 1,000 miles of canals have been built to siphon and extract the river's water for other purposes. It is also worth noting that nearly every dam and canal that make up this infrastructure network has been funded by and is now managed by one federal agency, the Bureau of Reclamation. Zooming in now, the Colorado River is divided into 2 distinct basins, an upper and a lower basin. Each basin is legally entitled to extract an equal volume of the river's water per year, 7.5 million acre-feet, or about 2.4 trillion gallons. These 2 basins have 2 very different characteristics. The upper Colorado is the source of 90% of the river's water, which comes from seasonal Rocky Mountain snowmelt. This region is sparsely populated and not suitable for large-scale agriculture. While the upper basin contributes nearly all of the water supply, the lower basin contributes most of the river's extraction. The lower Colorado contains all of the region's population centers, as well as major agricultural irrigation projects. Though Mexico contains only a small fraction of the watershed, its 1.5 million allotment gives life to the country's largest breadbasket agricultural region. Due to its regional importance and its fragility, the lower Colorado Basin is the focus of study for this research. The lower basin of the Colorado is the primary water source for Arizona, Southern California, and Southern Nevada. Major metropolises like Los Angeles, San Diego, Phoenix, Tucson, and Las Vegas owe their existence to the vast network of dams and canals which siphon from the river. I will now introduce the dominant development framework which has constructed the region as we see it today. The Colorado River Basin we see today is an invention of settler colonialism, the product of manifest destiny ideals taken to their natural conclusion. It is also a recent invention, as a serious survey of the basin didn't begin until 1869. American desert settlements, therefore, seek to solidify their legitimacy through the intentional erasure of the desert's indigenous past. To the American, the mass irrigation and development of desert lands is seen not as conquest, but simply as seizing an opportunity to improve upon a blank slate, or a terra nullius. Danica Cooper, in writing about the American worldling of deserts, remarks that emptiness is a culturally constructed and political instrument. Sarah Ahmed points out that if a colonizer establishes land as unused, the use of a colonizing force can be justified in transforming such land into something deemed useful by the colonial agenda. Depicted as terra nullius, as an empty space on the map, the desert can represent both a useless wasteland and a blank canvas of endless opportunity, if only enough water could be provided to sustain it. This dominant framework embodies the ideology of the Bureau of Reclamation, which treats water as the currency that holds the power to determine life or death. To them, if water is currency, then reservoirs are bank accounts and dams are cash registers. As Mark Reisner puts it in Cadillac Desert, the only way to conserve water is to keep it safe behind a dam. The only way to waste water is to allow it to flow out to sea. In an effort to better understand the environmental impacts of this development framework, this study analyzes publicly available data to produce models of the visible and invisible consequences of this extraction on the lower basin region. Extraction from the Colorado River is governed by the Colorado Compact, a century-old document which apportions the river's water resources so sweepingly that, by its end, water is no longer permitted to flow to sea. This Sankey diagram was prepared as a better way to visualize these divisions. As depicted in the Sankey diagram, the extraction portion of this system is provided by a series of 8 dams for diversion and for storage, including some of the largest structures in the world, like Hoover Dam. Transmission of extracted water comes through a 1,000-mile network of canals, which transports river water hundreds of miles to cities and to farms. In some cases, these canals pump water over thousands of feet of elevation, consuming up to 3 million megawatt hours per year, the same energy as a medium-sized city. Last, the transmitted water accumulates in major population centers and agricultural regions. Each of the regions highlighted on this map depend on the Colorado River for the majority of their water supply. By the numbers, this population that is directly served by the Colorado River exceeds 28 million, and the wealth accumulated within these population centers exceeds 2 trillion USD. This represents 2% of all global GDP that is now tied into dependency on this river. If this region were to secede as its own country, its population and GDP would be roughly equivalent to Canada. In terms of agriculture, 5.5 million acres of land are now irrigated by the Colorado River. This represents 15% of all American agricultural harvest, specifically 90% of American winter vegetables. So how can we model the connection between water extraction and population growth? One method used in this study was to construct a timeline of the last 120 years of population change across the regions of California and Arizona, which now depend on river water for their survival, highlighted on the right. There is a clear uptick in population growth for each region once its respective extraction canal was completed. In contrast to population growth, the same timeline can also be used to document the change in the river's water levels over time. Using publicly available streamflow data obtained from USGS, documented here is the last century's worth of monthly water flow data for Lee's Ferry, the point at which the Colorado River enters the lower basin before its extraction. Note especially the periodic flooding that occurs every summer compared to very dry winters. This streamflow data from Lee's Ferry is now overlaid with streamflow data from the river at Yuma, which is a point right before the river enters Mexico. The completion of the 2 largest storage dams within the system can be clearly seen in the streamflow. Except for exceptionally wet years, the river's annual heavy summer floods have now been replaced by a constant trickle, governed now by hydroelectric utility demands. Now, both timelines are combined. The contrast is clear. Population growth in the region has come directly at the expense of water supply. This has had drastic ramifications on the riparian ecosystems, which depend on the Colorado's historic streamflow patterns to survive. One critical revelation of this study is that, after conducting a 10-year rolling average of the Lee's Ferry streamflow data, it can be seen that the total amount of water present in the Colorado River system is declining over time, especially as climate change reduces the rates that snowpack accumulates in the Rockies. The allotments of river water, however, are still based on the same legal Colorado Compact Agreement from 1922. This document was produced using the best-known streamflow data available at the time, which was available for the years 1905 to 1922. However, these years were actually exceptionally wet for the region. Thus, even though the compact was based on what was believed to be a conservative estimate at the time, it assumes that the river can produce an average stream flow rate, which it has not been able to match since 1925. The current flow rate is less than 1 million acre-feet a month in the lower basin, which is only 2/3 of the assumed flow rate which forms the basis of all apportionment of water. The discrepancy is accounted for now, via overdraft from reservoirs, draining the region's water safety net. With climate change, this discrepancy will only grow larger over time. It is clear that alternative frameworks must be considered in order to ensure the long-term survival of this region. Drawing from Donella Meadows' notion of leverage points from thinking in systems, how might the existing system of Colorado River extraction be amended to spare the lower basin from its impending crisis? To Meadows, the most powerful leverage point to change a system is to change the mindset of the system's users. In other words, to embrace new perspectives that inform new frameworks. What other mindsets or paradigms could help to reimagine the dominant development framework of the lower Colorado Basin to lessen the burden of its extraction from the Colorado River? As an alternative to the dominant settler colonial framework through which the Colorado's extraction systems have been justified, the extraction system could be seen through the lens of the water itself. Drawing from the work of Macarena Gomez Barres in the extractive zone, the Colorado River could be seen to possess its own form of memory. Across the lower basin systems of extraction, transmission, and accumulation, each might have its own memory, its own submerged perspective. One such perspective might be the spared river, focusing on the Grand Canyon. Although the canyon was spared from damming, it is still far removed from its natural state. Glen Canyon Dam upstream permanently alters the temperature and silt content of the river. Species like the humpback chub, depicted here, depend on warm, silty floodwaters as spawning grounds, and have therefore become nearly extinct. Another perspective might be the Concord River. Secured behind dams, the water of the Colorado no longer floods to replenish the silt along its riverbanks. Instead, silt now lays across the bottom of reservoirs, slowly building up against dams until the spillways are blocked and the dams become unusable. Conquered behind deep reservoirs, water becomes progressively colder the longer it spins below the surface. No native species can survive in these frigid conditions, so the Bureau of Reclamation must continually airdrop non-native fish into these lakes in order to keep the Concord River open for recreational fishing. One last perspective that this study has considered is the artificial river. Where does all this Concord water end up? Despite the region's explosive urban growth, over 70% of the Colorado's water still goes to irrigation, primarily to support water-intensive alfalfa production. At the end of the day, the primary reason for the destruction of the Colorado River ecology remains to support the cattle industry. Dozens of native species extincted to keep alive our cows. In conclusion, this study provides a general overview of the current system of mass extraction across the Colorado River, with a special focus on the lower basin. The study analyzes and visualizes this extraction system, revealing sweeping consequences, both visible and invisible. The dangers of continuing these extractive processes are clear. Climate change continues to decrease water availability and increase fragility, leading to an uncertain future for major urban and agricultural centers alike. Following Donella Meadows' notion of leverage points, the next steps of the research will be to further explore alternate mindsets to critique this dominant framework, drawing from Macarena Gomez Barres' notion of submerged perspectives. The final objective of this work will be to advocate for the redevelopment of the lower basin's constructed environment around the needs of the river that sustains it, not the other way around. By reversing this growth pattern and redeveloping in harmony with our rivers in their natural state, we can begin to imagine a more resilient future for the West after water. Thank you very much for your time.